All right. Again, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. My name is Michael Méndez. I'm an assistant professor of environmental policy and planning at the University of California, Irvine, and I'll be your moderator today. And we're going to be speaking about a new study called that's focused on tainted air and specifically looking at air quality monitoring and the safety of farm workers in wildfire mandatory evacuation zones. This research is at the intersection of air quality science, public policy, and environmental justice studies, and it's particularly bringing in a different type of researchers, including community researchers, to understand vaccine problems and engaging in transdisciplinary or what they call convergence research, acknowledging that the science alone, air quality, cannot do justice to this information without also engaging different disciplines, methods, and knowledge, including farm worker knowledge. This research is particularly important because over the last years in California, we experienced a major climate change crisis, a series of compounding events, particularly around wildfire and wildfire smoke. For example, in the 2020 fires in California, they created an economic impact of $3.7 billion, or what is referred to, from what is to referred to as smoke taint. A smoke taint occurs when smoke and ash permeate the skin of grapes, which can affect the taste and smell of wine, making it unsellable. However, too much concern is often placed on the impacts to the wine industry, but not on the farm workers that are harvesting crops during wildfire events and how their lungs are also being tainted. They are not provided with adequate occupational health and safety protections, let alone hazard pay or federal disaster funds to work in mandatory evacuation zones considered hazardous to the general population. So now more than ever, it's crucial to understand how these events amplify existing inequalities and how to lessen the resulting harms, particularly in the context of extreme wildfire events on undocumented Latino and Indigenous migrants. Next slide. And this webinar is based on a new study that was published in one of the journals of AGU in the journal GeoHealth that looks specifically at Sonoma County, California, which is in Northern California. And our speakers will talk a little bit about that in assessing from a public policy perspective, an environmental justice perspective, and of course, from leading experts in air quality science from the National Center for Atmospheric Research, NCAR, an NSF-funded organization and grant to understand what was the exposure of farm workers laboring in mandatory evacuation zones during the recent fires. So to kick off the study, we're going to have a scientific panel where three of our co-authors are going to talk about some of the key findings. This will be followed by a community discussion panel with farm labor advocates and an actual farm worker that experienced these inequitable situations. So first, I'll be introducing the scientific panel. This is led by Carlo Chunga Pizarro, who is a first-generation Ph.D. student in the Urban Planning and Public Policy Department here at UC Irvine. They received their BS and Masters in Urban Planning from Texas A&M University. He is originally from Peru, but immigrated to the United States at the age of 7 and was raised in Texas. Their research focuses on how undocumented communities engage in disaster planning and the extent to which sanctuary cities center undocumented individuals and disaster preparedness and mitigation. This is joining our research team is Dr. Rebecca Hornbrook, who's a project scientist number 3 in the VOC measurement group at the Atmospheric Chemistry Observation and Modeling Laboratory at NCAR. Her research interests centers on the atmospheric emissions and fates of natural and anthropogenic volatile organic compounds, or VOC. Dr. Hornbrook has participated in the development and deployment of state-of-the-art instrumentation to measure VOCs in the atmosphere, contributing significantly to the measurement capabilities of the NCAR Trace Organic Gas Analyzer and instrumentation. As a member of this research team, she has participated in a large number of NSF and NASA-funded field campaigns, both focusing on airborne and ground-based emissions. Next, Dr. Rebecca Buchholz completed her PhD at the Center for Atmospheric Chemistry at the University of Wollongong in Australia, studying southern hemisphere atmospheric composition using a range of measurement and modeling techniques. In October 2014, she started a postdoctoral position at NCAR and joined a team as a project specialist in 2017. Her current research uses global climate chemistry modeling and remote sensing to answer questions about air quality and atmospheric composition, with a particular focus on the impact of wildfire emissions. And so these three individuals will be talking about our research, but I also want to give a shout out to one of our other co-authors, Kevin Christensen, who's an independent researcher who was very instrumental in help framing the research findings and also with the research data. Thank you, Kevin. So I'll pass it along to Carlo, who will take over on the scientific presentation.
Thank you, Mike. For those who are not familiar, Sonoma County is located in Northern California, just about 86 miles above San Francisco. Sonoma County has the largest producer of wine in the state. It has also been listed in the top 5 and 20 for most deadly and destructive wildfires. For those reasons, we put Sonoma County as one of the epicenters for extreme wildfires and environmental injustice. Sonoma County heavily relies on livestock, agriculture, and the region's award-winning wine, with the wine grape sector alone employing for more than 70% or about 8,500 of laborers in the county. However, that total number of farm workers may be significantly undercounted due to the undocumented status of the workforce. As Dr. Méndez mentioned, when governments confront the challenges of extreme wildfires, they often embrace and engage with marginalized populations, and particularly undocumented Latino, Latina, and indigenous farm workers. Given their social and undocumented status, they are disproportionately affected by racial discrimination, exploitation, economic hardships, and lessened English and Spanish proficiency, fear of deportation, and require special consideration in disaster planning. Even so, a lot of the studies that we cited in our paper estimated that about 46% of farm workers are from Mexican indigenous groups. And these indigenous farm workers in Sonoma County are culturally and linguistically isolated, with many of them speaking neither Spanish nor English, but only their native language. They are not of Hispanic or Latina descent and migrate from regions to Mexico with unique cultural and linguistic traditions. Indigenous farm workers face the same, if not more, abuses and challenges as other agricultural workers. Non-Spanish speakers are isolated and face barriers to filing complaints about workplace safety and labor rights abuse. But discrimination can come from both Anglo employers and non-Indigenous Latinos. These forms of discrimination and unsafe labor conditions provide a baseline of vulnerability, giving them a lower adaptive capacity to face a wildfire. These vulnerabilities conditions include inadequate provision of emergency response and information, lack of oversight for occupational health and safety, disruptions to transportation infrastructure, exploitation practices, and the ineligibility to receive federal disaster relief aid from FEMA. During extreme disaster events, disaster recovery resources are mainly available towards U.S. citizens. And for those reasons, local migrant rights and environmental justice groups become essential to providing services to farm workers. Norte for Justice and Movimiento Cultural de la Unión Indígena provided essential services such as language access to emergency information in Spanish and indigenous dialects, labor protections for farm workers and endangered in the field, and private disaster relief funds for undocumented migrants that are eligible for federal aid. Current disaster preparedness efforts continue to exclude undocumented migrants, even as governments implement new regulations. And farm workers were put in danger in Sonoma County during the fires from 2020 even to 2017. Our study focuses on the 2025 LNU complex and glass fires and the use of the ACT passes during these fires. The ACT Pass program was established in 2017, and this program authorized farm and vineyard owners to require farm workers to enter into mandatory evacuation zones, which are considered hazardous to the general population, and continue agricultural work during a wildfire event. Supporters of the ACT Pass program argue that it is intended to safeguard and harvest crops. However, migrant and labor rights advocates claim that it puts farm workers' health and safety at risk. The AgPass program has been used for 6 different fires from 2017 to 2020. And to do our study in collaboration with Norwegians for Justice, they filed a FOIA request and received AgPass applications, like you see on the right of the screen, of all the years the program was active. We took all of these applications that we received and began our first analysis. The first major step of the study was to investigate the results of the public records request of the approved AgPass applications that were granted during the 2020 glass and LNG complex fires. We received hard copy applications and online Excel data versions of these applications. For workers to enter the evacuation zones, and fire submitted, the applications consisted of information like dates of access, locations, working activities, and number of workers and vehicles entering the work site. However, in a review of both of the data sets, we found major inconsistencies in the AgPass program. We found that only 61% of approved AgPasses did not list the number of workers. And additionally, a lot of the multiple locations work sites did not state if workers even spread out throughout each location, if workers went to every work site, or even the dates or time of the duration as the application intended to ask. Lack of complete worksite addresses information caused uncertainty in mapping analysis. However, we were able to map out the worksite using the addresses that were given to us. We found that there were about 115 workers within the LNU fire and 178 for the glass fire work sites. And we approximated it that around 1,603 workers were within the LNU complex fire, while 633 were within the glass fire. The rest of our analysis on the AgPass during the 2020 fires season can be found in the policy brief that is linked below. And in this policy brief, we talked a lot more about the specific inadequacies that we found with the AgPass program and also the positive recommendations that came from our analysis. And then for our next session of our study, I will hand it over to Dr. Hornbrook and Dr. Buchholz to speak more on the air quality analysis and the local air monitoring study for this section.
Thank you, Carlo. Hi, I'm Dr. Rebecca Buchholz, and I'm an atmospheric chemist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. And my colleague, Dr. Hornbrook, and I have been working with Professor Méndez and Carlo and this NSF-funded study to investigate air quality in Sonoma County during these 2 wildfire events where these ag passes were issued. So our study period is that latter half of 2020 when Sonoma County experienced these back-to-back fires, the LNU complex and glass fires. On this map on the left here, you can see that Sonoma County, that little orange dot in the middle, is the single EPA air now station, which takes measurements of PM 2.5. And so PM2.5 are these small particles, really fine particles with diameters of less than 2.5 microns or much smaller. And they're emitted in large quantities from fires. And they're small enough that they can be inhaled deep into the lungs and can result in both short-term and long-term health impacts. And so the EPA has recommendations for reductions in activity based on different levels of PM2.5 concentrations. And so in addition to this EPA station, this government-managed Air Now station, there are a large number of individually owned low-cost sensors called purple air sensors within the Sonoma County. And those are those purple dots that we see in this map on the left. Our team analyzed the PM2.5 data from the government station, as well as these purple air monitors during the 2020 wildfires, to really take a look at the air quality within Sonoma County as a whole, as well as in these regions where the ag passes were issued. And so the plot on the right is a time series of daily average PM2.5, these fine particles, and it goes over the time period of August to November during those large fires. Time is on the x-axis and the PM2.5 concentrations or amounts are on the y-axis. And the overlapping fire periods, the LNU, is shown shaded in that pink box in the back, and the glass fire time period is in the gray shading. During those time periods, the air now time series, so the government sensor is shown is that in that black dashed line, and the purple air PM 2.5 regional average is the purple line. And during this time period, we can see there are significant increases in both the air now black line and the purple air purple line. The shading on the purple line shows the standard deviation in the data across the region. So where the shading is really broad, so for example, around that October time, you've got some really large shading in the purple. This shows that there's a real large variability in purple air data throughout the region, meaning the air quality was really variable across Sonoma County. During this time period, there are several days where the PM 2.5 exceeded the World Health Organization guideline for daily average PM 2.5. And there are also many days where the average exceeded the EPA threshold, marked as the red line there as unhealthy. So this is really unhealthy for everyone, not just sensitive members. And the EPA recommends to reduce prolonged or heavy exertion when the air quality reaches this unhealthy level and above. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Hornbrook, now to go into more details about the regions.
Okay, next slide. Thank you. So in this slide, the two plots on the right-hand side show the hourly averaged PM 2.5 from both the Air Now station, again in black, as well as the hourly averaged purple air data from the vicinity of the ag passes. So this time we are looking only at the purple air data that is in the vicinity of where those ag passes were issued. So on the top is the LNU fire and the purple air data is shown in purple, and on the bottom is the glass fire and the purple air data is shown in red. And again, the horizontal dashed lines show that threshold for the unhealthy category that is issued by the EPA. So using the government station data from the Air Now data, we calculated that the average hourly PM 2.5 exceeded that unhealthy threshold on 14 days, but using the purple air data, it was for 17 days. And that was in the vicinity of the ag passes. So there wasn't a big difference for the LNU complex fire, but it was more than double for the glass fire. We also found that on multiple occasions, the smoke levels remained high overnight, with the PM 2.5 values exceeding levels that were considered unhealthy or worse. We also found in particular that the government-managed Air Now monitor far undermeasured the impact of the glass fire event in the vicinity of the ag passes that were issued for it, with significantly higher PM 2.5 values than what the government monitor indicated. So our findings showed that there are a significant number of days and nights in which the air quality was unhealthy when the ag passes were in effect. And we also found that the current EPA air quality monitoring is not sufficient for determining whether or not the air quality is safe for workers to labor during all wildfire events in the county. Okay, next slide.
Thanks, y'all. And then together with all of these analysis, our research shows that the undocumented farm workers are disproportionately exposed to hazardous air quality during wildfire events, exacerbating existing vulnerabilities and health risks. The regional variability in the PM2.5 levels during significant wildfire events like the LNU complex and glass fire further emphasizes the necessity of a localized and accurate air quality. Our policy recommendations call for the development of mandatory noise plans, real airtime quality monitoring at work sites, and the provision of hazard and post-exposure health screening for farm workers. These measures are just a few of the critical for farm workers' immediate safety and well-being and for fostering long-term resilience and health equity. By implementing these policies, we advise that Sonoma County can set up a strong precedent for safeguarding the health and migrants of agriculture workers in the face of increasing wildfire risk. And you can find more on the policy brief that will be talking more about the policy recommendations on the link below, and I believe Dr. Méndez is also sharing that in the chat. And during our discussion, we will go more into depth with our policy recommendations. And next, I will hand it off to Mike for the panel.
Thank you to our researchers, Carlo, Rebecca, and Becky, and also Kevin, who's joining us online here as well, observing. We thank you for that important research, really understanding what the air quality was like at these extreme wildfire events last year when the Board of Supervisors of Sonoma County formally finally adopted a ag pass measure. There was several Board of Supervisors that made the comment that they explicitly wanted more air quality data. So we hope that this will help inform future policies as well as a racial equity analysis, which was not part of the Board of Supervisors staff analysis last year. They explicitly waived that requirement of a racial equity analysis when they instituted this Ag Pass program and all the racial injustices that it would happen to largely Latino and Indigenous migrants. So now we're going to have a community and labor perspective on this scientific research. And we have two great individuals joining us, Max Bell Alper, and as well as a farm worker, Anayeli Guzman. And Anayeli, if you could please turn on your camera and we can stop sharing the slides, please, as well. And first, I'm going to introduce Max. For over 20 years, Max Bell Alper has organized economic, racial, and climate justice throughout California. He has helped build North Bay Jobs with Justice into a strong grassroots coalition of over 30 community and labor organizations. Today, through his experiences, along with Anayeli, we will learn about their lives of the lives of migrant workers in California and the current efforts to have successful jobs so they can build a more just future. Helping provide a more on-the-ground and farm worker perspective, Anayeli Guzman is a farm worker who's originally from Oaxaca, Mexico. She has been a part of the farm worker organizing team with North Bay Jobs with Justice for over 3 years. In addition to Spanish, Anayeli speaks and organizes in her native language of Mixteco and identifies as Indigenous. She has emerged as a key leader in the fight for disaster hazard pay and dignified wages. So I'm going to first hand it off to Max and Nayeli. Max, if you can talk a little bit more. You heard about the scientific research, these deviations between the one U.S. EPA air monitor that's miles away from worker sites, and the community science purple air that shows strong deviations in certain periods of the 2020 fires, where the air quality was quite worse on the ground and in the vineyards. If you can help us provide a little bit more perspective, what was it like for these workers to work in these conditions, particularly at night when many of the harvesting was occurring? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Mike Méndez, as well as all the researchers on this project. And so I'll share a little bit, and then want to make sure to give Anayeli some space to be able to share about her experiences. And so, from our perspective here, we've been on the front lines of climate change, field wildfires for years now, and this research is really significant because it really gives some hard statistics, numbers, and perspective on what workers have been saying for years, which is that they are on those front lines and in reality are experiencing unhealthy air, are experiencing being very close to wildfires in evacuation zones, and I think it's important to recognize, as Professor Mike Méndez was saying, the vast majority of workers here are immigrant and Indigenous people, all people of color, and the vast majority of owners in the wine industry are white men. And so it is important to understand an analysis here around race and gender, especially as more and more women workers are working in the vineyards. And that's why workers have been organizing and winning and calling for disaster pay and dignified wages and language justice here. And we've actually been able to start getting both the county to provide disaster pay for workers when they're not able to work, as well as a number of vineyards and wineries who have agreed to disaster pay, which means both compensation when you can't work, as well as extra hazard pay when you're in these conditions. But I'd like to bring in Anayeli to share a little bit about some of her experiences working during wildfires and smoke. So Anayeli, si puede compartir un poquito con nosotros sobre sus experiencias trabajando durante los incendios y el humo. Anayeli, adelante, por favor.
Buenas tardes, Max.
Buenas tardes, Anayeli. Entonces, si puede compartir un poquito y yo puedo traducir sobre sus experiencias trabajando durante los incendios y el humo. And so Anayeli is going to share a little bit about our experiences and I'll do some translation.
Ok. Pues he trabajado durante los incendios del 2017, el 2020, entonces ha sido una situación algo difícil porque para nosotros como trabajadores del campo es complicado tomar una decisión entre no trabajar o trabajar.
And so I
Ah,
have, Anayeli, si puede dejarme un poquito de espacio de traducir. So Anayeli saying, I have worked in the wildfires during 2017 and 2020, and it's very difficult for us as farm workers to make the decision on whether we work or not.
Primero que nada son situaciones difíciles porque estamos exponiéndonos. De por sí, trabajar durante la cosecha, de por sí ya es difícil porque es un tanto estresante, agotador, todo es por contrato, entonces siempre es así, tratando de hacer lo más que podemos.
And so working during the harvest is very challenging in general because we work by contract, we earn by weight, and so everything is very stressful, and you're trying to work as fast as you can.
Y ahora en una situación de ya sea evacuación o de humo, es todavía más difícil porque si de por sí ya es ir trabajando rápido, entonces en cuestión de ir con el humo es algo que te cansa más, que te irrita la garganta, los ojos, y no tienes la posibilidad de poderte cubrir para no estar respirando el humo.
And so it's even harder to work the harvest when there's smoke and wildfires because it really hurts your throat and you can't even cover your mouth to prevent breathing the smoke.
Y como les decía en un principio, es una situación difícil para los trabajadores del campo decidir por su salud o decidir por su economía.
And so it's very difficult for us to make a decision between our health and the economics.
Yo como madre de familia es todavía más difícil el saber que estás dejando a tu familia, a tus hijos en una situación de riesgo, tanto para ti como para ellos. La verdad es estresante, es difícil, se siente una tristeza, una impotencia de no poder decidir entre quedarte con tus hijos o ir a trabajar.
And so as a mother, it's very difficult to make these decisions about what to do during harvest. And so we have to try and think and make a sad decision between leaving our family to go work or not being able to have enough money.
Y es también tanto triste el saber que los dueños de estos viñedos, ellos solo están como preocupados por obtener su uva, porque el humo ah, no afecte la uva, pero ellos no se preocupan en que el humo afecta a las personas que están trabajando.
And it's very difficult when we feel that many of the owners are just more concerned with their grapes than they are with the workers, and that they're concerned about the impacts of the smoke on the grapes, but not on the impact of us as workers and our health.
Hace poco me preguntaba una persona si a nosotros nos informaban sobre o nos decían sobre que teníamos que usar mascarillas o que nos informaran sobre cómo se encontraba el aire en esos momentos. Y me puse a recordar y vino a mis recuerdos que nosotros ni siquiera sabíamos que podíamos saber la calidad del aire.
And so someone recently asked me if we were informed about air quality and using masks during fires, and it really reminded me that we were not taught anything about air quality.
Entonces, pues de mis experiencias es eso lo que me ha tocado pasar, tanto no tener acceso a... Es difícil como para nosotros tener que tomar un día para ir a hacerte un chequeo médico y a veces ni siquiera sabes cómo está tu salud después de trabajar en situaciones de humo.
And that it's very hard even for us to make the time to be able to go to a doctor and be able to see how we're doing after these experiences in smoke. Gracias, Anayeli.
Okay.
And this is, for many of these reasons, and we'll be able to get more questions to Anayeli, but for many of these reasons, por muchas de esas razones, workers are fighting for and winning disaster pay, and have been able to get that at the very first wineries and vineyards. I'll put a link in the chat here from a Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle article recently that includes about workers winning disaster pay.
Thank you, Max and Anayeli, for those very vivid comments, and it just underscores how much stress and anxiety and inequality that many of these farm workers are experiencing. I have a question. There was a question regarding, are these wildfires happening in isolation? And the short answer is no. Here in California, as you know, we have compounding disasters. For example, when the 2020 wildfire happened, those lasted for almost 3 months because there was two colliding complex fires. But at the same time, you had a drought conditions that were fueling the wildfires. You had a heat wave that was occurring in August and September, and of course you have the COVID-19 pandemic. And I was wondering if we can hear a little bit more. What was it like working in the fields? Oftentimes, people are sent out at midnight, one, because the temperature in general is cooler to pick grapes and it's better for the taste of wine, but also during these heat waves and intense wildfires, some workers thought it was some employers thought it was better to send truckloads of farm workers at night. But our research shows that there was actually significant higher spikes at night than daytime. And we've heard also from other workers that they had been working and laboring in there for many days or weeks, and they would come home and have black saliva. So if I maybe hear a little bit more, what is it like on the ground in these evacuation zones harvesting crops?
Yeah. Anayeli, ¿se puede compartir un poquito sobre cómo es trabajar durante los incendios y el humo, o tal vez el día de la bandera roja hace unos años?
Sí, hace creo que 3 años fue cuando en el condado había una alerta de una bandera roja por relámpagos, y esa tarde nos citaron a nosotros a recolectar la uva.
And so three years ago, there was a red flag warning for lightning, which was the cause of many of the wildfires in 2020. And it was that same day that we were asked to go to harvest wine grapes.
Entonces, yo, junto con los compañeros que trabajamos, dijimos, así vamos a piscar, y ellos dijeron, sí, así
And,
vamos a cosechar.
and me and my coworkers asked the supervisors, are we going to harvest during a lightning storm? And the supervisor said, yeah, that's what we're going to do.
Entonces, los compañeros decían, es peligroso, y yo, en mi persona, les digo, soy madre de una niña, era el miedo por qué pudiera pasar cuando nosotros estábamos piscando, y qué podía pasar si algo llegara a pasar y mi hija estaba en casa, ah, y o sea, no estaba ni concentrada en lo que yo estaba haciendo, porque era mi preocupación por qué nos podía pasar, si todo podía estar bien o si todo iba a estar bien con mi familia.
And a lot of my coworkers started saying this is very dangerous. And I was really thinking about my daughter and being a mom, and what could happen while I was there harvesting wine grapes. What could happen to my family? And it was very difficult to concentrate on work because I was really thinking about my family and what could happen during this lightning storm.
Y pues así terminamos de trabajar. Todavía nos estaban presionando para apurarnos más y cambiar a otro bloque para seguir piscando.
And so we stopped working, but the supervisors were really pressuring us to continue to work, even though there was a red flag warning and lightning.
Y recuerdo que después de esa tormenta de relámpagos, en la madrugada de esa noche, empezó a llover, y ellos nos estaban presionando para empezar así a trabajar.
And I remember that even as it started also raining, they were continuing to pressure us to harvest.
Entonces fuimos como 3 compañeros que decidimos no entrar a piscar, y los demás, no sé si por el miedo, por la necesidad económica, ellos así empezaron a piscar.
And so 3 of us said we were not going to harvest, but some of our coworkers, I don't know if maybe because of economic need, but they started to harvest even in those conditions.
Y recuerdo que, por cierto, esa madrugada llamé a Max para que fuera a ver en qué situación nos estaban poniendo a trabajar.
And during that time, I called Max with Jobs with Justice, so that they could know what kind of situations we were being put in.
Y da tristeza porque en vez que ellos valoren el trabajo y el esfuerzo de nosotros, ellos se enojan porque tú tomas la decisión de no entrar a cosechar en esos momentos.
Yeah. And it makes me sad that in these moments where we're concerned around our safety, they're not listening to us as workers, but just pressuring us to continue harvesting wine grapes.
Sí, entonces es por eso la lucha de el pago por desastre, porque sería, tienes la oportunidad de tú decir no voy a trabajar, pero no vas a tener esa preocupación de decir no voy a tener para la renta, para la comida esa semana.
And that's why we are fighting for disaster pay, so that we can make a decision to keep our families safe and not have to go to work, but still be able to be paid and still be able to provide food for our families. Gracias, Anayeli.
Great. Thank you. I think I'm going to ask 2 more questions, and then I'm going to bring back the scientific panel, and then we're going to, as an entire panel, the whole panel, we're going to answer some of the audience questions because we're getting some really good ones. So I have 2 questions. In September of 2023, the Board of Supervisors in Sonoma County formally adopted this agricultural pass program. But they waived or rescinded a board policy of a racial equity analysis. Max, why do you think that happened? And if the racial equity analysis was completed for the agricultural pass program, what do you think perhaps the analysis might have detailed?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we need to be honest here about the structure of this industry, and this is a luxury crop that and their own estimations is a $7.7 billion industry just in Sonoma County. This is world famous wine region, and we need to be honest that this luxury and this wealth is dependent on the labor and the knowledge, and then these really real challenges that Anayeli and other workers are talking about. That all of that wealth and luxury is dependent on the labor and knowledge of immigrant and indigenous workers. And so, if we're honest with ourselves in the community here, our economy does not exist without immigrant and indigenous workers. And so we need to be able to also look at not just the immediate impacts, but what are the long-term impacts post-disaster. And what we see over and over is that income inequality actually grows, and especially racialized income inequality. And so if that is allowed to just happen and we don't do a racial equity and justice analysis, that it'll exacerbate existing inequalities and existing injustices. And that's part of the reason, we are looking to both improve the current jobs of farm workers, but also develop the future good jobs in climate adaptation and mitigation. Because the reality is fires are going to continue, extreme heat is going to continue, smoke-filled skies are going to continue. And we need to be able to do a lot of climate adaptation and mitigation projects to be able to make the whole community safer and more resilient. And the reality is that immigrant and indigenous workers like Anayeli have a lot of experiences doing this kind of work from their own homelands, including prescribed and cultural fire, vegetation management, as well as so much experience here on the land, working in wine country, that we all have the responsibility in the community to really listen to the workers and to support workers doing these kind of trainings, these kind of work projects that will help all of us be able to be safe and resilient, but at the same time can create good family sustaining jobs based in traditional ecological knowledge for and by the workers.
That's great. Great response and really hits home what we're doing. And my last question is for Anayeli, if you can translate for us. While this research is focused on extreme wildfire events, the reality is that in Sonoma County and throughout California, we're experiencing climate whiplash. How is this taking a toll on farm workers going from one extreme climatic event to the other?
Entonces, eso, la última pregunta para usted, Anayeli, es que no están solamente experimentando incendios, pero también están experimentando mucha lluvia, inundaciones, y cómo es experimentar estas dos diferentes cosas, dos diferentes extremos en la misma época para usted y los compañeros de trabajo.
Pues a mi manera de ver es en la cuestión de la situación de que no estás trabajando y lo económico es lo mismo. En cuestión a el miedo que se siente cuando es el fuego, no es el mismo cuando es la lluvia, pero el estrés de que no estás trabajando y no estás recibiendo un pago es lo mismo.
And so the reality is when we're not able to work, because of floods or fires, it's the same, and we feel the same economic stress. In the moment, fires are a lot scarier than the rains, but the reality is they have the combined impact of that. Then we're not able to work, and we don't get paid, and there's a lot of stress. And I would just add that we also really, while we may not be experiencing drought at the moment, there's been a lot of drought, which has a tremendous impact on the weight of the grapes that workers are picking, which means less income for workers. And so when we look at the overall impacts of the climate crisis, farm workers are always on the front lines. But the good news is workers are standing up, fighting back, and winning. And I'll put a link in the chat here. Just recently, farm workers in Sonoma County did a major march with over 600 people ahead of the wine grape harvest to demand disaster pay and then dignified wages of $25 an hour or $250 a ton, which is the average ton of grapes in Sonoma County is selling for over $2,300 a ton. And so workers feel that winning $250 a ton or $25 an hour is the least that they are owed, especially on the front lines of climate crisis in a luxury industry.
Thank you. So I'm going to invite back the entire scientific panel, Rebecca, Becky, and Carlo, to join us. If you can turn on your cameras. So thank you so much. It's been enlightening discussion thus far, but I wanted to bring everyone back together to talk about some of the key questions that we're receiving from the audience. And the first question is directed to Rebecca and Becky, and it comes from Kevin. Can Rebecca and Becky talk about the applicability of this scientific analysis and findings on wildfire regions across the United States, where agricultural employers may also be bringing in farm workers into these types of dangerous wildfire zones?
I guess I can take that one. So wildfires are increasing due to climate change across the country. And we know that it can impact farm workers at all sorts of regions. So yeah, not just Sonoma County. Hang on one second. Oh, it went away. So this is obviously a question that we need to spend more time investigating.
Well, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about how these local air quality monitors are adding to our understanding of what workers are experiencing in these evacuation zones. Maybe just a little bit more about elaboration of what is why are these scientific findings significant when you consider those against the one U.S. government monitor that's miles away?
Right. So air quality can be impacted by fires on a very small scale compared to what the network of air now stations provide. So one of the reasons that we were studying in Sonoma County, in addition to all of what was, also being studied from the egg passes, is we focused on the 2020 time period because the number of purple air stations available had increased significantly from 2017 to 2020 because people are really interested in knowing what their own air quality is like because it can be very different from one part of the county to another. So having a lot of purple air stations really gives us the ability to see how that air quality varies from one part of the county to the other. So in other counties, there might not be quite as many. It definitely depends on population and on community interest in knowing that air quality locally.
And I add, and we cite this in the paper, is that California is an innovator on this community science of purple air, which is open source data that's uploaded. So those that don't know, purple air is a low-cost, affordable air sensor that you can put in your home, outside your home, at your place of business, at a public space. And it's continuously doing the local air quality readings and uploading it to the grid. And California has the most purple airs in the country. And at the time we all did this analysis, Sonoma County had the most purple air in the entire country, and of course in the entire state of California, for good reason, because Sonoma, along with Napa, has had experiencing extreme wildfire events from 2015, definitely 2017, and of course the various ones in 2020. Next question, I'm going to hand it over to Carlo. We get a question from Clara. I was curious whether your findings have received any pushback from key decision makers in Sonoma County. And if so, does the pushback highlight any needs for future research that you're considering pursuing next?
Thank you for asking that, because I really want to talk about our experience when we went to present at the county, Sonoma County boards. During from 2021 to about 2023, both me, Dr. Méndez, and Dr. Buchholz and Hornbrook, we attended several county board meetings to explain to the key political figures what we found. Every single one of our analysis and things like that. Even sent them a bunch of our policy briefs beforehand to just let it know that we are looking into this. And we actually received a lot of pushback from them in the sense of not letting us, giving us like more than 1 minute presentation on what we found. So during the discussions, they kept signaling, we want experts to talk about this. Well, we were there giving our expertise, opinion, and analysis on what was happening on the ground. And so it felt very dismissive from a lot of those political figures. Not only was it dismissive of the experience of the farm workers, but also of our analysis that we were doing. So sometimes when we create these policy briefs and these papers, it sort of becomes, to me, it feels like it's a tool to continue to advocate more for the argument of hazard pay and continue to protect the lives and health of all of the farm workers. So I do hope to continue to do a lot of this work, just mainly to push for more advocacy and also just help with that argument that we're trying to work with folks like North Just for Justice.
Great, thank you for that, Carlo. Max, I'm going to ask you a question. This comes from Doreni. And the question is, while the focus of the study was on California, can you speak to how your findings and policy recommendations can be applied on a national scale?
Yeah, I mean, when we started doing this work, 4 years ago, many people thought that wildfires were just a kind of a California or West Coast thing, but what we've seen in the last few years is that wildfires are actually popping up all over the place, all over this country and all over the world, including in places where people have not seen wildfires at this scale before, whether that's Texas and Louisiana, and so. The reality is that the front lines of climate crisis are expanding, and in many ways, what as we've experienced on a micro scale here, we're all on the front lines in Sonoma County, but actually, what farm workers are experiencing is they're experiencing first and hardest what the rest of us are just starting to understand right now, and I think in many ways that's analogous to what's happening all over the country, is that what we are experiencing in California is now happening everywhere, and whether that's wildfires or looking like other climate disasters, and so I think that one of the things we've really learned is that when we first started talking about things like disaster insurance, hazard pay, that what we call disaster pay together right now, no one thought that was possible. And now there's been multiple companies and county that have agreed to it. And so, I give credit to a vineyard and winery owner named Doug Boshin, who in an article when they were deciding to do disaster pay, to be the first company to do it, he said that these practices will be standard in the industry in the next few years, and that is the reality. There won't be a way to have agriculture without things like disaster pay, and so we really encourage everyone to, instead of resisting this, to really listen to the people and leaders like Anayeli Guzman, who are on the front lines, and be leaders alongside workers in doing the right thing.
Thank you for that. And in the chat, I also put that the The Secretary of the Health and Human Services Department, Javier Becerra, who was a child of farm workers and from California as well, last month issued, along with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety, a comment period on how wildfire smoke may be disproportionately affecting farm workers throughout the country. So I also encourage you to take a look at that. And we did provide the Secretary's office our findings that you saw here, as well as other migrant organizations through a policy workshop we had in May. So next, I'm going to go to a question perhaps for Anayeli, if she's still around, or if I'm not sure if she stepped away.
Anayeli, ¿todavía está con nosotros? Sí, tiene una pregunta para usted.
Ok, sí, dígame.
Okay.
Gracias.
So in terms of hazard pay, the question is, regarding hazard pay, are you advocating for this to apply mainly to wildfire smoke events, or does it cover other acute climate hazards as well?
Entonces la pregunta es si en este tema de pago por desastre, si están solamente hablando sobre en incendios o también en otros peligros.
En cualquier tipo de peligro, como ya sea inundaciones, ya sea humo, entonces es para todo tipo de situación que te sientas con riesgo de estar trabajando.
Hmm. And so Anayeli is saying, we believe that the disaster pay should apply in all conditions, whether that is floods or extreme heat, but in all dangerous conditions, workers deserve disaster pay.
Thank you. And then I think for our last question, I'm going to give it back to our scientific panel. It's from Durrani again. Is it common for there to be just one air now station in operation in counties across the country?
Do you want to take this, Becky, or I can start and you can end? Yeah, so it really depends on the size of the county. But yeah, these air now EPA stations are generally much sparser than the purple air low-cost sensors that we were talking about that have really great coverage. And it's usually possible that there's only one PM 2.5 sensor within a county. We were trying to look in this study if there might have been another EPA sensor close on the border, but we couldn't really find anything like that. So yeah, anything else you want to add, Becky?
I was just going to add that EPA deploys a number of different sensors at their stations or at the stations that they include in their network. And many of them have ozone monitoring, but PM 2.5 seems to be more sparse, although I haven't actually studied that specifically. Thanks for that question.
And this is a function of federal budgets and appropriations and limited budgets, of course. And so this highlights the need if workers are being sent out into hazardous air quality conditions, mandatory evacuation zones, that one data source is not sufficient enough. Local real-time monitoring is also needed. So this really highlights the fact of being able to do additional research to show how real-time local air quality monitoring can help safeguard farm worker communities and perhaps create hopefully new policies that either put better protections, hazard pay, or have some type of threshold where they actually finally do decide when it is too dangerous for these farm workers to enter into these mandatory evacuation zones. As our research has shown, that there's very little training around wildfire behavior from the workers themselves to their supervisors and employers. So with that, Carlo, if you put the last slide of our thank yous, and just want to say thank you again for this opportunity to participate in this webinar on these new findings, and more specifically to Max and Anayeli. Gracias por tu participación en este webinar. Your perspective on the ground is quite important. And of course, we want to thank the National Center for Atmospheric Research, which is funded through the National Science Foundation, for the Innovators Early Career Grant Program, which has made it possible for myself and, of course, for Carlo to be part of this, and then also for the hours, in-kind hours that NCAR puts in to allow Becky and Rebecca to serve on this important research where we provide both air quality science with public policy and environmental justice perspectives. So thank you all. And of course, thank you to Mimi Cruz and Han Parker at the UC Irvine School of Socioecology, who helped organize this webinar, and of course the North Bay Jobs with Justice for leading the effort on farm worker advocacy, hazard pay, and climate justice, and for their participation on this. So thank you all, and have a great day.